We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record. I'm joined this week by my esteemed colleagues, Hannah Rodger, who's the political editor of the Sunday Mail, and of course Douglas Dickie of the Scottish Daily Express. So polls will open tomorrow in the Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse by-election. Probably one of the most controversial by-elections I've ever covered. I mean, it's been a doozy from beginning to end. Let's just cut to the chase and do the scores and the doors. I mean, I think we're probably all speaking to people in the different parties. I think that the SNP are fairly confident. I wouldn't go further than that. Labour, despite having a troubled campaign, they say their data is good and they still think they can win this. Reform are not talking up their chances of coming first, but they think that second place could be doable. I mean, Hannah, what's your sense of it? I mean, it's not long to go, and it's very difficult to predict, given it's going to be a low turnout. There's not been any opinion polls in relation to Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse. We're used to getting spin from the political parties. They're always going to talk up where they are. What's your sense of it?
So, in terms of my running order, I think SNP will win, but I think Labour actually will probably come second and Reform third. I think that the SNP, I think they're talking up this threat of reform so much to try and activate their, not their members, but voters in the area who think, oh, I can't really be bothered, but I would vote SNP. I think they're really going in on this reform to almost kind of prompt people to get to the polling stations and vote for SNP to sort of block reform. And I know that Labour, basically if Labour gets out all the people who say that they will vote to Labour, I think that they believe they've got a good chance of actually winning it. But that's, it's a very tall order if, it relies on getting huge volumes of people out, and in by-elections, traditionally it's a low turnout anyway. But I do think that it's the SNPs to lose. I don't, last week I was a bit more sure Reform would be second, but I now, especially given the antics of Nigel Farage earlier on in the week, and Labour's kind of picking up momentum a little bit, I think Labour actually will probably come second.
Doug, let's start with the SNP. I mean, they've had quite not an understated campaign, but it's been a solid, unspectacular campaign, which I think started with focusing on the record of the Labour government and then quickly pivoting to reform and trying to frame it as a two-horse race between the SNP and Nigel Farage. It feels like right now, if you had to say there was a favourite, they might be slight favourites for it.
I actually think they're big favourites. I think they'll win it, and I think they'll win it quite comfortably. I don't think it'll be a kind of loveless win. They're going to win it probably about 33% of the vote, I would imagine.
That's quite specific.
Yeah, well, kind of around. I think about a third. I was thinking about a third. A third of those should turn up. I think I'll vote SNP, and that'll be enough to win. Reform and Labour will probably be sitting around about the 20% mark each. So I think it'll be quite a gap, but not a ringing endorsement of the SNP government, not a ringing endorsement of John Swinney. Really, what they've done in some ways, the SNP, they've not really had to do anything because there's been so much focus elsewhere that all they have to do is try and get their core vote out, and their core vote sits at about 30%. And if they can get that out, then they're going to have a good day. I still think Reform might pip Labour to second place. It just feels like they've got a bit of a momentum behind them. I don't think anything that happened on Monday is going to dent the Reform vote, frankly. I think people are voting for them because of complete dissatisfaction with other parties as opposed to what Reform necessarily stand for, and they see Reform as this protest vote. Labour, I've had a bit of a miserable campaign. I was saying off air, I get a bit of sympathy for their candidate. I think he's a decent guy, and I think, in other circumstances, you've got three people basically fighting it out, and two of them, there's a wee bit of political opportunism. Katie Loudon's been jettisoned in from elsewhere to sit in this seat because she's obviously earmarked to somebody for the future. I think we can all safely say that Ross Lambie wouldn't be standing as a Reform candidate if Reform were polling at 5%. He wouldn't have defected. Whereas I think David Russell is kind of in it for the right reasons, and I've got a bit of sympathy for him. But he's been completely hamstrung by events elsewhere, and the fact that his own party seems scared to put him up against anyone. And it's such a terrible look.
Do you know what I think about David Russell? Right, I think that because I've now spoken to him a couple of times, and I think that as a sort of regular member of the public, regular guy from that area, he probably would appeal to quite a lot of people. He's got decent opinions on things, and he might not be the most sort of eloquently spoken. He might get his words jumbled up sometimes. He might say something silly, but actually that's being a normal human being. And I almost think, looking at it, that Labour's taken this guy who's just a regular Joe Blogs and tried to sort of polish him up and tried to almost train him in how to be a politician, when actually they should have just said, you know what, just go out there, do your best. If maybe show him ways to kind of laugh off the mistakes in a way that seems more authentic to him. But instead it just comes across quite robotic, these lines that he's trotting out, and I feel like he's not actually been allowed to just be himself, unless he is a total basket case, in which case, maybe he shouldn't be the candidate. But I almost feel like Labour's trying to cover up the fact that he's just a regular bloke. He's
not helped by the fact that it's a by-election and there's so much focus on this one seat, where this a Scottish election and Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse was just one of 70 odd seats, that there wouldn't be this focus on him, and I don't think that would matter that much. And you might find that he would probably be a lot more popular in that kind of situation, but because there's this national spotlight on him, all these issues,
a bit of a baptism of fire.
Absolutely, maybe. But his problem now is, if he was to stand next year, I don't know if he will. You guys are maybe get better insight than me on that, but he's now already kind of tarred with this brush.
You've been like some sort of bumbling.
And I kind of feel for him.
I feel like with David, you're right. He's a nice man, and I think if he was an MSP, he'd be good at sorting out voters' problems, particularly with the local council, because that's where his background is. But in a by-election, you need more than being a nice man. You have to be able to do media and things like debates. I guess the issue for Labour is if they do lose this by-election, I mean, let's face it, the quality of the candidate probably hasn't helped, but that's not been the game changer for Labour. The issue has been the performance of the Labour government. Things like winter fuel, WASPy, and this general sense of disappointment that people voted for change and they don't feel like change has happened. So
it might have happened, but it's for the worst.
Yes, change that you can't believe in. And I think that if Labour lose, I think you're going to see a blame game. I'm sort of picking that up already. I think the UK party will probably focus on the quality of the candidate, and the Scottish party will probably focus on the performance of the UK Labour government. But Labour remain upbeat. It might be total BS, but they say that their data is good, and they're confident that it's still a two-horse race between themselves and the SNP.
Yeah, and I think as well, us as journalists, we have to really try and not, I suppose, get sucked in by, who's making the most noise, which is currently the SNP and Reform. And Labour has had, up until, I'd say, the last sort of week, Labour's been a lot quieter, but that doesn't mean that there aren't loads of people in the constituency who support Labour. It's just we're not sort of, we're focusing maybe more on the SNP and Reform because they're the ones like jumping up and down all the time, and particularly Nigel Farage and Reform, who just, they want to generate arguments and cause controversy to keep them in the headlines.
So let's just focus on Reform for a bit. There's a lot to say. Nigel Farage was up in Scotland this week. He started off in Aberdeen, and then sort of preposterous visit to the constituency as well, which was very fleeting. But let's just listen to him talking about the Barnett formula and the future of the Barnett formula if there was a reform government.
Christopher McCall, Daily Record.
Hi, Nigel. Back in 2015, during the general election campaign, you said that taxpayers in England were, quote, cheesed off with the amount of public money that goes to Scotland. Can I ask, is that still your view? And if you won power, would you look to scrap the Barnett formula?
The Barnett formula, it seems to me, is really somewhat out of date. What I'd like to see is a Scottish government that's able to raise a bit more of its own revenue and a Scottish economy that has actually got genuine growth. And I don't believe that can happen without this sector booming. All right. And I think, the Barnett formula goes back to the 1970s. Is there an argument it should be looked at again? Of course there is. But, I mean, frankly, if you look at welfare dependency, if you look at educational standards, the idea that there's sort of 50 billion this year, which is roughly what the figure is going to be going to Scotland, it isn't going to reduce in the short term until Scotland actually starts to have an economy that is thriving. And right now it's going in completely the wrong direction.
Can I just ask quickly as well, do
Yeah.
you support the concept of devolution as the Scottish Parliament?
Oh yes, devolution's here to stay, and in fact devolution now is being extended into England, right down to a county basis where we're going to have elected county mayors. No. Devolution is here to stay. Sadly, over the course of the last 20 years or so, devolution doesn't appear to have worked very well. I mentioned education. I could talk about 800,000 plus on the NHS waiting list. It hasn't worked out very well. Doesn't mean devolution's wrong. It means the people running it haven't got it right.
So the Barnett formula obviously is the mechanism by which public spending increases are allocated to the Scottish Parliament. And I think it's widely credited with giving Scots a significant per head spending advantage over people in England. I do think that Nigel Farage coming up to Scotland a couple of days before a by-election for Holyrood and essentially saying that he's going to cut our funding, it was a very strange thing to do. And I don't really see how that really benefits Reform UK's campaign in this by-election.
No, the one thing I'm going to pick you up on, though, Paul, earlier you said that Nigel Farage made a fleeting visit to the constituency. I will say he at least visited the constituency, unlike another party leader who was in Scotland on Monday, 20 minutes down the road, and couldn't be bothered to put in an appearance. I thought it was a really poor show from Keir Starmer that he didn't
Agreed.
show up. Yeah.
But see, on that though, is there not something to do with if you're up for government business?
I'm sure he could have.
No, I'm
for
pretty.
10 minutes
I think there
on
would.
his lunch break.
I think there would be complaints though if he was using government funding to come up for party political reasons.
I think it highlights the fact, though, that he has been absent from, whether he could have done it on Monday.
But he would argue,
could have
and
been-
Sarwar is the person to be, I suppose Angela Rayner did come up, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Anyway.
Starmer should have made an appearance, but the point being, the Barnett formula is the sort of cornerstone of our funding system. Nigel Farage comes up and basically says he wants to scrap it, which will mean, because he supports the UK, huge spending cuts for Scotland.
So the second thing I'll say before I move on to that is that he's not the only party that wants to scrap the Barnett formula. The SNP want to scrap it because
and you would have criticised them for that, no doubt.
and absolutely, and I'm going to criticise Nigel Farage for it, because for me one of the key factors of unionism is that this kind of pulling and sharing. I know it was a kind of cliche during the referendum that that we're all in. Richer parts of the UK can be used to help those parts that need it that bit more. So no, I'm absolutely. I can kind of understand why he done it, why he said it, because I think it was a pitch in many ways to reforms core, if you like, I suppose, which is going to be the kind of southeast, coast of England and these kind of former industrial English cities. It's maybe a pitch to them, and he's maybe reckoning that it won't have that much impact on this by-election, which I don't think it will. But I have to say, I fundamentally disagree with him on it.
It would have been a good message in the Runcorn by-election,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
it would benefit that constituency. But Hamilton, which is city centre or its town centre is run down, probably needs more money, not less. And I was just thinking. On you go.
No, it was a weird thing, but I think he was maybe slightly caught off guard by Chris's question, and credit to Chris, it was a great question. I think I got the sense just watching that video that he was actually just saying his opinion. It wasn't like some sort of political spin, and I think maybe in hindsight you might think, oh, I maybe shouldn't have said that, as you say, coming up to Scotland for a Scottish Parliament by-election, but I do think that's what he genuinely believes.
It seems to me that Reform as a party haven't got any stance on the Barnett formula. They haven't formulated any stance on the Barnett formula.
Well, they have now.
Well, that's, as you say, that's Farage's view on it. I mean, should we be applauding him for being so honest in front of people? I don't know. It's a rare thing for a politician to be so honest, but it's not. It's not a policy I would endorse in any way.
I think that Reform are doing well in this by-election, despite Farage, not because of him. I mean, if you look at the racism row about that foul advert that they put out about Anas Sarwar claiming that he would prioritise, or claiming that he said he would prioritise Pakistani communities, which was just vile, foul nonsense. Farage was asked about it at a press conference and then screened it. And I'm just thinking, if I was a Reform UK activist in Scotland, highly unlikely, I'd be looking at it and thinking, that's not helping our campaign. I feel like every time Farage has made an intervention, he's kind of blundered because he doesn't really have a grasp of Scottish politics in a way that he does have a grasp of politics south of the border.
Nah, I disagree. I think he knows exactly what he's doing.
You think it's helping them, the ad thing?
Well, it's helping to keep them in the newspapers, because that, after he screened that, then it led to Anas Sarwar being asked, and he had to, respond again, and then Farage responds to his response, and then John Swinney gets involved, and then Farage says that John Swinney is the reason why there's protesters coming to protest against his visit, which is complete nonsense. So keeping this going is allowing Reform to get that publicity. And I think for Farage, as we know, any publicity is good publicity. The fact that he dodged all these journalists in Hamilton on Monday, he probably saw that as a great coup because it's giving more attention than it would get if he actually was just questioned by them. I genuinely think he knows exactly what he's doing, and particularly with that racism stuff, I think he knew what he was doing, and the reaction that advert would cause. And I think we spoke about it last week. I don't think anyone believes that he personally created that advert, but I don't think he would have a problem with it.
Dougie, I mean, obviously the Scottish Daily Express, I think, has endorsed Reform in this by-election. Just interested, what do you think about the content of that Reform advert?
Yeah, I think it was very, very inadvisable. I don't endorse it at all.
But is it racist?
Sorry?
Was it racist?
I think it was borderline, yeah.
I think it was racist and disgusting.
And they doubled, see when the story first broke, it was like $8,000 they'd spent on it, and now it's up to about 25
Yeah,
grand.
it's 25, yeah.
I think...
which proves my point that they know what they're doing.
I think they have, they've kind of doubled down rather than back down, which seems to be the kind of done thing in politics these days.
Very Trumpian.
Very, and Reform certainly aren't the only ones who are kind of guilty of that. I agree. I think Farage probably, first time he's seen it, might have been head and hands type thing, like, why have we kind of done this? But then, he's maybe seen...
I think he would have been jumping for joy when he saw it. It's giving the person who made that advert
I don't know.
A bonus.
But I think, they've maybe seen an opportunity with it, as you say, to kind of keep, kind of turn the tables. But it's... I
think the treatment of Anas Sarwar in this campaign has been pretty horrible. That advert, and then that fascist group and their racist ads about him as well. It feels like we're going backwards as a country, where things like this are becoming mainstreamed. In terms of our political debate and culture.
I think, these sorts of things have always been there, but, and you might not agree, but I feel like with the rise of Nigel Farage and Reform and Donald Trump, it's expressing the views that previously people would have kept to themselves, and by expressing them out loud, it then says to others who have those opinions, oh, well, this is okay. We're allowed to say that we hate, for example, immigrants, or we hate this group or that group, or we don't want them. And then it evolves into basically just targeting Anas Sarwar because he's brown, you know, and accusing him of being in some form not Scottish.
That is the implication, you know. This guy's not a Scot. He's not one of us.
Yeah.
It's just
it's
social media has a lot to answer for.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah.
One of the issues that people are discussing about this by-election is what will it say about the next Holyrood election next year? And on one level, if the SNP hold on, it looks good for them in terms of getting that fifth term. If Labour were to win, that might be a sign that they're ready to replace the SNP. But I'm not sure that we can read that much into it. I mean, it's an indication of next year's result, but I think the SNP have been quite lucky in this by-election because so much focus has been on the UK government and the racist ad. There's been little focus on their record as a devolved government. And I don't think we're going to see that next April and next May. I think that their record on public services like the NHS, schools, and everything else will be much more prominent. And you might see Labour becoming the sort of vehicle for defeating the SNP in first past the post seats. I mean, clearly, if Labour lose it, it's not good for them, but I wouldn't overanalyse the result on Friday morning in terms of next year.
Is that you giving us instructions, or?
It's more just sharing some general reflections.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, let's be realistic. It's one by-election. It's not going to tell us who is going to win, you know, the most seats in Holyrood. I think it's an interesting snapshot.
Snapshot.
It's a snapshot into, you know, how people in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse feel. And to an extent that can be extrapolated out at this point in time. But, you know, a year is a long time and things could change. And, you know, if miracles might happen and Keir Starmer might suddenly become the most popular Prime Minister in the history of this country, in which case Anas Sarwar's onto a winner. But right now, it's not looking so great.
The UK government seem to have cut out the missteps.
Yeah, they seem to be kind of rolling back on the things that they just kind of completely messed up in the beginning. And hopefully, you know, this is them on a path towards a bit more stability and a bit more sort of doing what people would expect of a Labour government, because all those things that they announced previously, as we've rehearsed a million times on here, winter fuel, WASPy, etc., those were not policies that you would expect from a Labour government, and they seem to be now trying to reverse that into more Labour-ish territory. So if they keep doing that, and crucially, if people start actually seeing the money in their pocket going up,
they feel better off.
Then, you know, Anas Sarwar might have a bit more luck next year, because the way things are right now, if the election was tomorrow, I don't think he would do so well.
I think Rachel Reeves was saying today that the winter fuel payment U-turn will kick in this winter, which again is good news for Scottish Labour.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is the one thing that's come up repeatedly in the doors for Labour. And so the quicker they draw under that complete and utter fiasco, the better.
I think as well, the kind of tragic manner this by-elections come about might play a part as well. You know, no one really wants to give the SNP a kicking because of what happened to Christina McKelvey. You know, it's such a kind of sad story. This isn't a Margaret Ferrier situation, you know, where there was
AKA Margaret COVID.
Yeah, COVID Margaret, where there was this kind of palpable anger towards the previous incumbent and whatnot. And I think that will, I don't really detect that same kind of fervour for this here. And I think the biggest challenge for parties is going to be getting their vote out. I think turnout's going to be miserable. It's to be a pretty grim day tomorrow. We're kind of back into a
What is the weather forecast, you know?
It's rain, wind.
That's a political word.
Yeah.
It's not great, and these things can have an impact, especially in a by-election, so close to, you know, Scottish election. We're less than a year out, the manner it's come about, I just think everything is in the SNP's favour. I think they'll win. I think as things stand, they will win next year as well. But I don't think I would take that from what happens tomorrow. I think you take that from the kind of wider, the problems with the UK government, everything else.
I think as well,
it's a long time. You know, a year's a long time in politics.
Yeah, I think what you said at the beginning as well. The SNP have actually been pretty lucky for this by-election because they've not really had to do anything.
No.
You know, and
I
that is
haven't
true.
got a second gear.
No, they just have to turn up and
there's been no focus at all on the things there should be
record.
focus on,
Yeah.
which is kind of their record, their record in government, their record in Hamilton, their record in Larkhall, these communities that feel left behind.
Yeah.
That's
And
it's
people
been
do
kind of,
feel
yeah.
totally scunnered in that constituency because there's so much sort of deterioration and they don't see things getting better around them. And I think, you know, unfortunately that's allowed Nigel Farage to come in and appeal to those who are totally disenfranchised.
So remind me what your 1, 2, 3.
Number 1, SNP. Number 2, I'm going for Davy Russell. And number 3, Reform.
I'm going for SNP, and I think Reform will pip Labour to second on the back of the Scottish Daily Express's endorsement. Labour a close third behind Reform, but a bit of a gap to the SNP, I think.
I'll stick with my prediction last week. I think probably SNP 1, probably Labour 2, and Reform 3. We're all going to look bloody stupid if Reform win this thing.
Or if
We're all going to
Labour
look
win.
stupid if Labour win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I just don't want to see a smug John Swinney on Friday morning. That's like worst.
You just don't want to see any John Swinney,
No.
smug or otherwise.
A miserable John Swinney would be okay. But getting driven away like Alex Salmon after the referendum, you know, in his car, face down.
Okay, that wraps it up. Thanks again to Hannah and to Dougie for joining me. You can listen to this episode of Planet Holyrood on Spotify or Apple Music, or watch it on the Daily Record YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for the latest news and the best bits of the podcast.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.